of any better way to intro this video than to say I love 70s horror movies. The 1970s was an interesting decade for the genre because it's the decade when the gloves came off of the horror genre, when censorship was finally out the window, and the gothic horror films stuck around, but they got a lot trashier in a lot of fun ways. The slasher genre started really coming to form, and all in all, things just got more wild and crazy, and there are so many classics, so many underrated gems. So today we're going to talk about my top 30 horror films of the 1970s. Welcome to the Cobwebs channel, my friends. My name is Daniel, and first let me say that this video, like every other video in the series I've been doing, covering the horror films of every decade since the 1930s, is going to be totally subjective. I am not trying to represent the horror community as a whole and create some kind of objective list that represents everybody. I mean, for one thing, what an impossible task, because everybody has different tastes. So this is just my taste. These are my top 30 horror films. I've ranked them from least favorite to favorite, so let's get into it. Number 30 is The Werewolf versus the Vampire Woman from 1971. So this is one of the films in Paul Naschy's Hombre Lobo series. Paul Naschy was a Spanish actor, director, filmmaker back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He's gonna show up a few times on this list, who just made like schlocky, fun monster movies, and I am a huge fan of him, and I think this one is actually one of his best. Now, it's a pretty traditional plot structure for a monster movie made by this particular guy, in that he plays a tragic figure with a monstrous alter ego, in this case, Waldemar Daninsky, a werewolf character he would play several times throughout his career, who falls in love with a woman and discovers there is a much more pure evil monster on the rise, and he's got to fight that monster. And in this case, it is a vampire woman. Very creepy vampire stuff in this movie, and Paul Naschy is always a great werewolf. He's got such a fantastic look. Him and the lead actress are sufficiently likable, the vampire is sufficiently evil, and they get to fight. And like, you get to watch a werewolf fight a vampire. Awesome stuff, and it looks fantastic on this Vinegar Syndrome 4K. Look at that original poster art right there. So cool. Number 29, Burnt Offerings from 1976. So this is a rare theatrical film directed by Dan Curtis. He's the guy behind the Dark Shadows series. And this is a haunted house movie about a family who moves into a house, a vacation house for the summer, and discover there are some malevolent spirits that they have got to encounter. It's got a great cast of Karen Black and Oliver Reed as the lead couple, people like Burgess Meredith and Bette Davis in supporting roles. But man, for me, the movie is just all about Oliver Reed. He is such a fun actor, and he gives such a big, hammy performance in this movie that is so much fun. This is just a really good haunted house movie with some really good twists and turns. I actually got to see this movie in a theater as part of a horror movie marathon about a year ago. That was my first time with it, and the crowd just went wild, especially when you get to the crazy ending of this film. Everybody was like hooting and hollering, so highly recommend watching Burnt Offerings for the haunted house atmosphere, for Oliver Reed's crazy performance, and definitely for that wild ending. Number 28, Valerie and Her Week of Wonders from 1970. A vampire folk horror fairy tale movie about a young girl, and it's really her like coming of age story, who discovers these magic earrings, and when she gets them, she starts to encounter very bizarre people, including a creepy circus or carnival that comes into town, and a vampire that she meets. Now, the vampire in this film is super creepy. This is a Czechoslovakian movie, actually part of the Czech New Wave, wave of movies that were coming out around that time period. And the vampire is just so bizarre. He's got a very Nosferatu type look to him. Super creepy. And this is a movie that, like, more than scary, just kind of draws you into its surreal fairy tale kind of atmosphere, a little bit like avant-garde, I suppose you might say, but a movie that I was really into more than a lot of other movies that might be described that way. Beautiful atmosphere, a very sympathetic lead character, a creepy vampire. This movie's kind of got it all. Number 27, Blood for Dracula from 1974. This is a team up between director Paul Morrissey and lead actor Udo Kier, who also made Flesh for Frankenstein a little bit earlier in this decade. It's a very unusual Dracula film. It's about how Dracula is slowly dying because of a lack of virgin blood in his country, that he hasn't been able to find any, and no other blood really sustains him like virgin blood. So his underling takes him to Italy so they can find some religious young women who hopefully have that virgin blood that he's looking for, and it can save his life. Yeah, this is a really trashy 70s vampire movie in just some insane ways. I mean, it's a sleazy film. It's really bloody. I mean, the blood drinking sequences are pretty disturbing. Just blood gushing down his mouth after he stops. Like, you see a little blood dripping down his mouth on the Blu-ray cover, but it ain't nothing compared to what's in the movie. Absolutely wild. But on the flip side, the movie is gorgeously made. I mean, it is beautifully shot. It has incredible music. Like, the score is just gorgeous. I mean, it's just such a well-made movie with very strange performances, though. Like, Udo Kier gives a bizarre performance as Dracula. I mean, you believe he's not a human being. Like, this guy is some kind of monster. That's not a person. So he's really good as Dracula if you want something truly inhuman, and I think this movie is kind of great. Number 26, Horror Rises from the Tomb from 1973. So this is another Paul Naschy movie, and I own this in Scream Factory's Paul Naschy Collection Volume 1. It opens up with Paul Naschy as a warlock and his witchy wife getting executed, and there he swears vengeance on the descendants of all those people. Very classic gothic horror trope. And then it cuts forward to the 1970s, and the descendant of that warlock is also Paul Naschy, and him and his friends are going to go spend a week at a house out in the country, and they discover the head of this warlock, and the warlock really wants to be revived. The movie is a mix of subgenres. It does feel a lot like Black Sunday, that classic Italian Mario Bava movie, but also Paul Naschy's warlock and his witch wife, they seem a lot like vampires. They come into people's rooms and seduce them, and then do something to them, maybe drink their blood. I'm not really sure. It's a little bit confusing, but the movie is enormously entertaining. I think it is so much fun. I mean, Paul Naschy is at his best as this warlock character. He's just having so much fun being deliciously evil. There's some cool effects in the movie. It actually turns into a zombie film for a bit. There were quite a bit of surprises up this movie's sleeve, and it is sufficiently sleazy in the way you might expect a 70s Paul Naschy movie to be. This one definitely fits the bill. A lot more than Werewolf vs. the Vampire Woman does, for sure. Number 25, Season of the Witch from 1972. So this is an early film by George Romero after he made Night of the Living Dead. And the movie is essentially about a dissatisfied housewife who turns to witchcraft to try to get control of her life and to try to empower herself. And, you know, it may not go as well as she hoped. So I love this movie. I actually think it's so underrated. It's one of George Romero's best films. If you just want a witchy movie, this film will deliver more than most any other films you will see. The lead actress, Jan White, is fantastic in the film. She really is sympathetic because you do feel like she just doesn't have any control over her life, and her husband is taking her for granted, as well as her kids. And you really just want her to find a way to break out of this cage. And witchcraft is her way out. And as far as seeing her like go to the store and buy herbs and tools and then perform these witchcraft rituals, the movie is very satisfying. If you want to see that kind of stuff on film, this movie delivers that really well. And it's just a very interesting character piece. So this movie is super up my alley. It's a really good 70s drama with the good witchy content. I love it. Number 24, Nosferatu the Vampyre from 1979. So this is a remake of the classic 1922 silent film. Everybody knows that. It's one of the most iconic vampire films ever made. But as good as that is, I might say the remake is a little bit better. I mean, I just think there's no question that it is a more interesting story, does more interesting things with the characters. It has an ending that is like very strange and kind of powerful. There's just a lot more thematically going on with this version of it. And it is visually stunning. Even though it is not a silent film, there are a lot of very quiet sequences out in the country of Romania or in the town that are just absolutely beautiful. Now, Klaus Kinski plays Dracula in this. Yes, he was called Count Orlok in the original, but that's only because they couldn't get the rights to actually do a Dracula movie, so they basically ripped off Dracula and faced consequences for that from the Bram Stoker estate. But that wasn't a problem for this, so this is just a Dracula movie, and he is the most pathetic version of Dracula I've ever seen. And I mean that in a good way. Like, when Jonathan Harker goes up to his castle and just finds this creature, I mean, he truly feels like an inhuman creature locked away in the hills of Romania, away from the world for centuries. Like, he absolutely sells you on that. And when Jonathan Archer is interacting with him, you can just feel like he wants to get away from this guy as fast as possible. This guy is so creepy and off-putting. And Klaus Kinski is just awesome. Awesome at doing that. Number 23, The Vampire Lovers from 1970. So this is the Hammer horror adaptation of Carmilla. Carmilla is a vampire novella that actually predates Bram Stoker's Dracula, about a female vampire. And this is the first film in Hammer's Karnstein trilogy, a trilogy of fairly sleazy 1970s vampire movies that they made. This movie is just awesome. It's got Ingrid Pitt as Carmilla, our central female vampire, who is incredible in this and just gives one of the most iconic performances in all of Hammer horror as she goes around seducing and drinking the blood of various women. This is one of the most influential films in the lesbian vampire subgenre that got very big in the 1970s. Great supporting cast in here like Peter Cushing and Douglas Wilmer as a couple of vampire hunters. The vampire imagery on display in this movie is awesome, with like giant teeth, the biting, the beheading, staking, just all the good kind of vampire content that you want. You can definitely find in The Vampire Lovers. Number 22 is Black Christmas from 1974, the iconic Bob Clark slasher film about a sorority house during Christmas who keeps getting very creepy calls from somebody. So I'm going to be honest with you. If you are wondering how is Black Christmas so low on your list, this is really a placeholder place for it. The thing with this movie is I've seen it once. It was years ago. I loved it. I thought it was great. I actually thought it was the scariest slasher film I'd ever seen, but I don't remember it very well. And normally when I'm in that kind of situation, I would just rewatch the movie just to be sure about that my placement of it is right. But it's October. I'm not going to watch a Christmas movie right now. I'm just not going to do it. And plus I'm planning a Christmas horror list video in December, so I'm going to rewatch it for that. So I'm going to wait. So just rest assured, if you're offended that this movie is so low on the list, don't be. It's just because I haven't seen it in a long time. Just based on my memory, this is where I felt comfortable placing it. But yeah, I do remember this being a great movie. I'm just going to have to watch it again to remember for sure why. Number 21, Phantasm from 1979. The iconic Don Coscarelli low-budget indie horror film that spawned an unlikely franchise. It's about a young boy and some other folks in a small town who discover that there are, I guess, interdimensional beings doing some really creepy stuff around a mausoleum and a cemetery. It's got some great graveyard imagery. The tall man, the spheres. There's so much cool, creepy stuff in this movie. It is, narratively unclear, kind of dreamlike, which maybe starts to wear a little thin for me by the third act, but I do think it's really good. I really like the characters in this. The look and the theme music is just awesome. At number 20, Prophecy from 1979. So this is an ecological horror movie about a doctor and his wife who are sent in to mediate a dispute between a paper company and the Native American tribe who lives there. And there he discovers that the company and their factory are doing some terrible things to the environment, and it's mutating some stuff around, particularly a bear. So this is a John Frankenheimer movie. Yes, the guy who made the original Manchurian Candidate, pretty iconic director. And this is kind of just like a trashy monster movie, and I love it. This is also the only movie on the list I don't have physically. I need to get a copy of it, but I think this movie is so much fun. It is so entertaining. I love watching this lead doctor who's like kind of a jerk, but in an entertaining way, just like come to blows with everyone around him, and then discover there are crazy mutated animals all around, and the bear horror action that we get towards the third act of this movie is it's just awesome. I think this movie is enormously entertaining. It's kind of trashy. It's kind of dumb, but I love it. Number 19, The Amityville Horror from 1979. You guys all know this movie. It's one of the most iconic haunted house films of all time, about a family who moves into a house in Amityville and discovers it's definitely very, very haunted. So this is actually a movie I avoided for a long time because I'd always heard it was bad and kind of boring, because I think that was its reputation for a long time. That's all I ever heard. I finally watched it. I thought it was great. I thought it was a really good movie. I thought Margot Kidder and James Brolin were terrific in the lead roles. James Brolin, sufficiently likable at the beginning, becomes more unhinged as the film goes. There's some genuinely creepy stuff in this movie. Great atmosphere. I love, it looks like a very fall, kind of by a lake kind of neighborhood, and the house has such an iconic look. But then I feel like this Vinegar Syndrome 4K came out and suddenly everyone loves this movie and I only hear positive things about it anymore. But yeah, I think it's a very good haunted house film. Looks incredible incredible on this Vinegar Syndrome 4K. Number 18, Race with the Devil from 1975. This is about two couples who are on a vacation in an RV who are then terrorized because they witness a murder during a satanic ritual, and now the cult is after them. So this is like a perfect 1970s exploitation drive-in movie. It is an enormous amount of fun. It's really intense. I love the lead guys who are played by Warren Oates and Peter Fonda. They're so good. They're such like classic 1970s actors, you know? And I think some people might actually classify this more as an action thriller than a horror movie, because that is how most of the movie feels, and it's got a lot of great car chase sequences that puts it pretty well into being an action film. But the satanic cult stuff is so awesome that I definitely put it into the horror category, because when they witness the satanic ritual, it's very creepy and it is scary. It feels like this cult is everywhere, around every corner, chasing them down. When I saw this movie, I mean, I thought for the kind of movie it is, it's pretty much perfect. I love it. Number 17, Alien from 1979. Absolutely one of the most important and iconic films of the 1970s, about people out on a spaceship who encounter some aliens and things do not go well. So I almost feel like I have to explain myself putting this movie here. This has always been a respect it more than love it kind of movie. It's weird for me to try to rank this because I do think there are so many things about this film that are incredible. For one thing, the set design is so, for its time, original and looks so good. Any movie like this today would just be covered in CGI, but this is all sets and props, and it looks absolutely awesome. The design of the alien, the xenomorph, is probably one of the most original things that's ever been designed for any movie. It looks unbelievable. I mean, this thing is so iconic. It continues to be scary to this day. We just got an Alien movie this year, and that design still works to terrorize people. The face huggers, the scene of the chest burster is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in a movie. A very good cast with Tom Skerritt and Ian Holm, and most importantly, Sigourney Weaver. But the movie is very slow. Like, it's very slow. And that's one thing I find interesting about the fact that it's such a mainstream classic is, you know, people talk about how Hammer movies are very slow a lot. I don't think they are. I think Alien is definitely much slower. And I don't really connect to any of the characters, you know, not Sigourney Weaver, not as much in this one as in the sequel. And I've just never felt like close to this movie. I've never like loved it with my heart. And I'm also not a big sci-fi horror guy or sci-fi guy in general. So that may have something to do with it, but it is an excellent scary horror movie. Had to make the list. I'm sorry it's probably not as high as you were hoping, though. Number 16, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde from 1971. Speaking of Hammer horror, this is another Hammer film. The way I describe this movie is it is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movie, of course, but it is also a Burke and Hare body snatching type film and a Jack the Ripper story. Because what it really is Dr. Jekyll is trying to find a way to slow down the aging process, and he discovers that he can do that by using female DNA. But he has to use dead bodies, so he has to pay people to bring him corpses. And then he decides he needs fresher bodies. And then he really turns into Jack the Ripper. And this movie's got some of the best Jack the Ripper imagery of any film I have ever seen. It stars Ralph Bates as the Dr. Jekyll character. He is deliciously evil and sinister. He's such a great character. This is his best performance in any of the Hammer films he was in, for sure. But when he turns into Mr. Hyde, it is a woman. It is Sister Hyde. So it's got some very interesting social commentary to it because of that. Martine Beswick plays Sister Hyde. She's absolutely incredible. And this isn't just an extremely unique gothic horror film from Hammer, one of the most unique films they ever made, with amazing atmosphere. The movie looks incredible, great performances and dialogue, and a sufficiently shocking ending. At number 15, The Hunchback of the Morgue from 1973. This is another Paul Naschy film, and I have this in Scream Factory's Paul Naschy Collection, Volume 2. And I think this is my favorite Paul Naschy film, my favorite movie that he made. It is incredible. It stars Paul Naschy as a hunchback who is very in love with a sick and dying woman, and much to no surprise, she does die, and he ends up partnering up with this mad scientist and helps him do horrible things because this scientist promises that he can bring this girl back to life. So this is very much a Frankenstein movie. It's not actually Frankenstein. There's no one in the movie named Frankenstein, but it really is a Frankenstein film with just the Hunchback as the lead character. This mad scientist is deliciously evil, and this is a classic character for Paul Naschy because he does play our tragic, sympathetic hero, our main character, but has a very monstrous side to him as well, and will do some horrible things in the movie. The film is very entertaining. It's very interesting. It's actually got good performances. I think this is one of Paul Naschy's most legitimately good performances that he ever did. I think The Hunchback of the Morgue is awesome. I can't recommend it enough. Number 14, The Exorcist from 1973. The classic story about Reagan, who is possessed by the devil, and the priests who have to exorcise it. This is weird. I almost feel like I have to apologize for this one as well. But the thing is, I think this movie is great. I don't have big complaints about this movie. I'm not going to sit here and criticize it. I guess I just don't love it as much as everybody else does, but I still think it's a fantastic horror film. I think out of the traditional demon possession genre, it is the best of them. It's absolutely the scariest of them. I just watched this movie and I just can't imagine how it must have been perceived in 1973. I mean, there had never been anything like this before, and I consider myself a student of horror film history. Let me tell you, The Exorcist is a groundbreaking film. Very shocking, very scary. But I guess on the flip side, I don't really like the demon possession genre all that much. I think The Exorcist is the best one, but it's not a genre that I'm as connected to as vampires and werewolves and ghosts. I find all those subjects much more interesting than demon possession, and I don't really understand why a demon would possess someone and then just kind of lay in bed and puke and shout profanity. It seems kind of boring. My guess is demon possession kind of destroys the human body, so it can't do much more. I don't know, but it is a very shocking movie, and I think it has great performances. Directed by William Friedkin, it very much feels like a 70s drama. It's very effective in that way. A devil movie I like even more, Blood on Satan's Claw from 1971. This is one of the most classic, informative folk horror movies of all time. It is the story of a village who discovers a deformed, demonic-looking skull out while farming, and then the youth, the young people of the village, start to go out into the woods and, yes, worship the devil. This takes place in early 18th century rural England. The atmosphere of it is absolutely perfect. And it is such classic folk horror because when you imagine folk horror, I feel like you imagine people out in a rural area talking about how the devil be in the woods and the youth are going out into the woods to worship the devil. That was a classic fear of this time period. But in this movie, it's right. They are going out to worship the devil and they are doing crazy things. And the devil is an impish goat-like monster who's just lurking around in the woods waiting to tempt you. It's classic. It's fun. I love this movie. It is a total blast. Tales from the Crypt from 1972. So this is an Amicus film. Amicus was a production company during this time period that made a lot of horror anthologies, and that's what this is. They were very formative to what the horror anthology genre would be. I mean, they weren't the first, but they really made it popular and just took that idea and ran with it. And Tales from the Crypt is absolutely one of their best films. Not Vault of Horror. I have it on a double pack. That's not making the list. That movie's kind of okay. But Tales from the Crypt is awesome. There is not a bad segment in this film, which makes it probably one of the most perfect horror anthologies of all time. My favorite segment in here is about Peter Cushing as an old man who gets horribly wronged, and maybe there's going to be some kind of ghostly vengeance to it. This is just, there's so many great segments to this. I actually did a whole review of this movie and all the horror anthologies from Amicus, so you can check that out on the channel. Speaking of those anthologies, The House That Dripped Blood from 1971. So The House That Dripped Blood is my favorite of all the Amicus anthologies. It all takes place in one particular house, and a police inspector is being told about all of the horrible things that have happened in this house, and that makes up the 4 stories that we're going to hear. Every story is good. So again, this is one of the most perfect horror anthologies ever made. My favorite one is about Christopher Lee and his daughter who move into the house and discover there's some witchcraft going on in there. And it's very much about the girl's nanny trying to figure out what's truly going on with this family. It's one of the best horror anthology segments ever made. The House of Drip Blood is so much fun. Ends on a very comedic note too, with a very funny vampire segment. So it's kind of got a lot of different tones that you can choose from. Number 10, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. One of the most important horror films of this decade, of all time. This movie really ushered in a new kind of horror film. It is a grimy and sweaty and just filthy feeling movie. Not filthy in that way, but like in literally like everything covered in filth. Skulls and bones and decaying bodies everywhere. This movie is bleak, it is intense, it is scary, and it does all of this by not really being that gory. Like, I joked in one video that I made on Hammer movies recently that Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell came out this same year. It's the last Hammer Frankenstein movie starring Peter Cushing, and that's a way gorier movie than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is. This film is so good at suggestion and at telling you the things that are going on, not totally showing you, and just absolutely sickening you. A very intense movie, directed by Tobe Hooper. Tobe Hooper is probably one of my favorite horror directors of all time. The look of Leatherface is so iconic. The family is so frightening. The characters are very thin. The dialogue is not great, but for the kind of movie it is, I think it's absolutely excellent, and it has to be in the top 10. Number 9, Dracula from 1979. One of the best versions of Dracula ever made. This stars Frank Langella as the Count, and the movie picks up right as he arrives in England. So we skip all the Transylvania stuff, and there he meets Jonathan Harker and Van Helsing and Mina and Lucy, and ends up actually having a real romance with Lucy. Of all the Dracula films ever made, this is one that fits the most in the gothic romance genre, because Frank Langella, he doesn't play Dracula sympathetically in the way that they shy away from his monstrousness or they make him like not be such a bad guy. He is such a bad guy. He does kill people. He does drink blood. He's a bad dude. But because of this romance and how it humanizes him, it makes him the character in the movie that you're kind of the most invested in. Frank Langella, he definitely doesn't play Dracula as a snarling beast like Christopher Lee. You never actually even see his teeth, though you do see him crawling up walls, which is really cool. But his performance just has a level of power behind it that you do feel like he is a powerful monster and he can do anything he wants. Dracula is an awesome movie with a very interesting, kind of ballsy ending to it. That's a little bit unusual for the genre, but I do love this movie. Number 8, Twins of Evil from 1971. This is my favorite Hammer horror film of the 70s and one of my favorite vampire movies of all time. It's the third film in their Karnstein trilogy that I referenced, and it is essentially about these two twins who lose their parents and they come to live with their uncle. Their uncle, who's played by Peter Cushing, is the local religious leader and the local head witch hunter. And this dude is evil. This is a movie that throws in so many different kind of movies. It is a witchfinder general, witch hunting kind of movie. But then also there really are vampires that live in the castle on the hill. And the guy becomes a vampire by giving his soul to Satan. So it's like a satanic cult movie too. It's got so many different kind of things going on. It's a movie that'll like keep you guessing on like what crazy directions it's going to go in. But it is so much fun. Damian Thomas, who plays the lead vampire, is awesome in this movie. The vampire and satanic imagery that this film is going to put on screen for you, it is just so fantastic. So I love Twins of Evil. Definitely my favorite Hammer film of the 70s. Number 7 is Suspiria from 1977. Directed by Dario Argento, this is probably the most classic Italian horror film of all time, about a young woman who comes to live at a ballet school and discovers that there is witchery afoot. So this movie sometimes gets put into the giallo genre. I disagree with that. I think it is just a straight up supernatural horror movie, but it definitely takes some of Dario Argento's giallo leanings into it with some brutal, and I mean brutal, murder sequences where you don't see who the killer is. Like with the girl falling and hanging with blood dripping down her. It's absolutely gruesome. This is one of the most beautiful horror films I have ever seen in my life. The colors everywhere are just jaw-dropping. I love Jessica Harper in the lead role. She's an actress I kind of am a fan of, like also from Phantom of the Paradise, which is another really good 70s movie. And the last time that I watched this was actually at a drive-in theater. Yeah, I got the chance to see Suspiria at a drive-in like 2 or 3 years ago. And like, this movie just blows me away. It is so awesome. I love it. Number 6, The Omen from 1976. Directed by Richard Donner, this stars Gregory Peck as an American diplomat who does something so shocking in the opening scene of this film. In the film, his wife has a baby and the baby dies during childbirth, and he is offered the chance to take a different baby instead and not tell his wife what happened and raise that baby as their own. And in one of the craziest things I've ever seen in a movie, he does it. Like, Can you imagine somebody doing that and like not telling their spouse about it? Absolutely shocking. And it turns out that baby is, well, he's going to be the Antichrist. Damien, one of the most classic figures of satanic horror. Maybe I'm one of the only people that likes The Omen better than The Exorcist, but I do. I love The Omen. This is another one that I avoided for a long time, and I don't know why. When I finally saw it a few years ago, it knocked my socks off. I think this is an awesome movie. I mean, I'm a big fan of Gregory Peck in general, from like his classic Hollywood days in the 50s and 60s, made a lot of great movies. Like Roman Holiday is definitely one of my favorites. And as just a stoic, strong leading man who is powerless against the forces of the devil in this movie, he's so good. Like, you feel like if Gregory Peck can't handle this situation, nobody can. Like, the power of the devil is like overpowering in this movie and leads to a lot of death sequences involving just like moments of chance all falling together just right to brutally slaughter somebody. Great supporting performance from David Warner as well, who's one of my favorites. One of the best satanic horror films of all time. Maybe the best? I don't know, but it's up there. Number 5, George Romero is back with Dawn of the Dead from 1978. This is the classic follow-up to Night of the Living Dead, in which a ragtag group of survivors, I feel kind of silly saying the word ragtag group just now, but I did just say that, who go to a mall and decide to hold up while the zombie apocalypse is ravaging the world outside. So I would say this is probably my favorite zombie movie ever made. This movie is just incredible. And this is one, the first time I saw it, I thought it was good. I liked it, but I didn't fully appreciate it. Then I actually got the chance to see it in a theater, and maybe like 10-ish years ago, something like that. And I was like, this is one of the best horror films of all time. Like, it just absolutely blew me away. I love Dawn of the Dead so much. It has such interesting characters. George Romero, he's so good at having just very interesting people in his horror films, but never sacrificing the horror of it for that. So I do love the characters. This movie is very interesting about people just all smushed together inside a mall trying to survive. And it is just kind of fun wish fulfillment, watching people go around a mall and do whatever they want. But the zombie stuff is great. It is scary. It's one reason I really like slow zombies, as George Romero always had slow zombies, is like you can just see one just kind of walking around and it's not a threat, but it's just kind of this weird, creepy atmosphere just having a zombie there. But then the more of them pile up, the more the threat grows and grows. I just think that's creepier and just more interesting than zombies just running at you and killing you immediately. So, yeah, definitely my favorite George Romero zombie film for sure, but I would say my favorite of all time. Number 4, Carrie from 1976. Based on Stephen King's first big commercial success book, this is directed by Brian De Palma and stars Sissy Spacek as Carrie, a shy, awkward, and bullied teenager who discovers she has incredible supernatural powers. Carrie is one of the best high school horror films ever made. Just high school films, actually, ever made. This character of Carrie, played amazingly by Sissy Spacek, is so sympathetic. You feel so bad for her. It is so much about the plight of bullied kids and the mean teenagers around her, played by like Nancy Allen and John Travolta in a very early role. You just grow to hate them so much. But then she also has a very difficult home life, dealing with her horrible mother, played incredibly by Piper Laurie. But like, you would always wish a bullied, downtrodden teenager could take revenge out on those people. I mean, Carrie takes some revenge, leading to one of the most incredible third acts in horror film history. Stylistically speaking, the movie is amazing. Brian De Palma is great at that, and I think this is probably my favorite of his movies. It's directed so incredibly. The prom sequence is just so incredible, even though you know watching it, it's not going to a good place. So Carrie is one of my favorite movies of all time. I just love this. Number 3, The Wicker Man from 1973. For my money, the greatest folk horror film ever made, about a police inspector who comes to the island of Summer Isle looking for a missing girl, and there discovers that the people are all involved in a cult and might have some very sinister plans for him. Man, I love folk horror. I love movies about pagan cults and human sacrifice and occult rituals and stuff. And the Wicker Man does all that stuff beautifully. But on the flip side, it has a legitimately like great atmosphere, like not even just creepy atmosphere, but you just love to spend time on this island. All the people there are so happy, like Christopher Lee as their leader, Lord Summerisle. He's just like so charismatic and fun, and you just gotta love spending time with him in this movie. It almost makes the police inspector feel like kind of a wet blanket, because you're like, these people are having fun. They're living their best life. Leave them alone, police inspector. But then like, of course, it's got to go to some dark places, but it has like great music. It's kind of a musical. Like, no, it is a musical, and I think all the songs are great. I talk about this movie a lot, and whenever I do, I always get comments from people saying like, that movie's terrible, it's boring, like, you're lying saying how much you like it. No, like, The Wicker Man is a classic. Like, lots of people love The Wicker Man, and I do too. So like, if you don't like it, you might be the weird one. That's okay. It's okay to be the weird one. I am too in a lot of ways, but not for loving The Wicker Man. This is an undeniable classic, and I love it. Number 2, John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978. The story of Michael Myers escaping and Dr. Loomis on the hunt for him. He's going to kill some babysitters. You guys know Halloween. Like, this is, maybe the most classic horror film of the 1970s. I couldn't love this movie more. Like, John Carpenter is my favorite director, and this is, it probably is the best slasher film ever made. I actually used to put A Nightmare on Elm Street over it. I think at this point, I'm on team Halloween. Michael Myers is my favorite of the slasher icons. I think he has got the best look. He is the one that creeped me out the most as a kid, even though I didn't see any of his movies when I was a kid. I wasn't allowed to, but I had seen the image of Michael Myers, and he was the scariest to me. I love the cast here. Jamie Lee Curtis is so great as Laurie and became such a staple of the franchise going forward, which is great. She has very just like natural banter with her friends and such. There's some weird dialogue in this movie for sure, but I like it. I love the atmosphere of this town. I like watching Michael Myers just walk around and watch people and hearing his heavy breathing. And that's like my favorite stuff in the movie. It is so creepy, and it pulls off having a good Halloween atmosphere despite the fact that it was not filmed in the fall. I feel like Halloween is my favorite horror film of the 70s. But it's not my number 1, and that's for kind of there's a weird situation with that, but let's talk about it. My number 1 is Jaws from 1975, Steven Spielberg's classic about Amity Island and them dealing with the problem of there being a great white shark in the water and eating people. So I said, hey, I feel like Halloween's my favorite horror film of the 70s because sometimes I kind of forget to include Jaws as a horror movie. Like, I admit it. I know some people get really upset about that if anyone dares to claim Jaws isn't a horror movie. And I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying most of the time when I feel like watching a horror film, I'm not going to put on Jaws. I'm going to put on Jaws when I feel like watching like an action adventure blockbuster, because that's what this feels like more to me. But I will say, to contradict myself, I just saw this movie in a theater. I just had the chance to see it in a theater. It was like my 4th time seeing it theatrically, to be honest with you. And the scares still get me. I jump at the jump scares. I jerk back when the shark bursts out of the water. It is unbelievable how effective this movie is. Like, I can't even believe it. I've seen it so many times. It's been one of my favorite movies since I was a kid. I actually think it's the best movie ever made. Like, I don't think any movie that's been made has been better than Jaws. I love the characters so much. The trio of Robert Shaw, Roy Scheider, and Richard Dreyfuss. That is one of the best groups of actors as characters that have ever been put on screen. Every moment of them on the boat together is perfect, and the shark looks perfect. I've actually argued with people before who have told me the shark looks totally fake. I couldn't disagree more. That shark looks amazing, and it scares the hell out of me to this day. So I think Jaws is the best 70s horror film, but also the best movie ever made. That's my list, but what are your favorites that I didn't mention? Let me know down in the comments below. There's a lot. I love so many 70s horror films. There are more movies I could have put on here, but this is my top 30. If you did enjoy this, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe, and you can click this playlist right down here for all the other decades lists that I've been doing. My favorites of the 80s will be coming before too long, so look out for that. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.